spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God.
I kind of suspected we would have a little lighter crowd this morning since it is a holiday weekend. A lot of people have been traveling, I'm sure. But I'm glad you're here. I'm glad everybody's here. I'm glad I'm here. I haven't been here for a couple of weeks. I've been sort of under the weather, recuperating from various ailments. But I'm doing better now, much better. So Sam is, he's off with his family this weekend, and he asked for a volunteer, so I said, sure, I'll do that. I haven't taught in this class in a while, in this auditorium in a while, so here I am. So how many of you remember when you were, in grade school and you had a substitute teacher? Betty remembers having to get substitute teachers, right? Now you remember how you treated those teachers? You're not going to treat me like that today, are you? I didn't hear that. What was it? I'm sorry. See, this is my problem. I'm going to move around, and I'll try not to move around too much. I know it's a problem for Brian to keep up with me here in our new age of video. I was actually a substitute teacher for a while when I was in college, and it was mainly early elementary school, so those kids were pretty good to me. But not that they didn't try to get away from things, of course. So we are in this series on the miracles of Jesus, which is titled "The Finger of God." I like that title. What does that title make you think when you hear it? What do you envision when you hear the finger of God? Yeah, the Ten Commandments written on the stone tablets, right? It's something like this for me. A couple of things come to my mind. We're not working. Let's see. Wrong button, maybe? No? Oh, anyway. They were telling me you had to really point. We get it working. Anyway, one of my thoughts is, the finger of God, like the finger writing on the tablets, which I have a little picture of here. Yeah, there it is. And of course, God is so powerful. Our God is so powerful beyond our imagination, isn't he? And certainly when he speaks, things happen. So that's one vision that comes to my mind. But the other one that comes to my mind, and I know this is probably something you may have already talked about in this class since I'm coming in quite late. But the second thing I think of is Jesus. Jesus. Now, Jesus never said, I am the finger of God. But he was. God was the power and he was the instrument, wasn't he? I mean, consider 1 John 1 through 3, where he says, in the beginning was a Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. He was God in the beginning. He was with all things. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that was made. Jesus was the finger of God, and I like that one the best, I think. In Matthew 28:18, Jesus said, all authority has been given to me on heaven and in earth. So I like that thought. I like Jesus. And of course, we are talking about Jesus in this series, and he is the instrument that's delivering these miracles. But so often before Jesus did a miracle, he would pray to God, and so that power came down. So in today's lesson, our lesson is entitled Walking on Water, but we're actually going to look at two instances where the disciples got into trouble on the water. So before we start that, though, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever found yourself in trouble on the water? I tell people around here, I've been telling people for ages that if you grew up here in the 50s and 60s like I did, if you didn't like water activities, you didn't have anything to do, So I've had a lot of experiences on the water, Gail. I both have, and I'm sure many of you have here. But have you ever found yourself in trouble on the water? Yes, I have. I imagine many of you have. And so I can appreciate, I'll tell you a quick little story. Gail and I bought a sailboat in 1998. And after we retired in 2001, we lived on it for about 4 years and traveled all over the Caribbean and so forth. But we bought that boat in Galveston, not in Galveston, but in Charleston, South Carolina, in February of 1998. And we brought it back home. We brought it home in February of all times. You know, there's a cold front every 3 days in February. And so we brought it home down the East Coast, around the Keys, up to St. Pete, and we stopping along the way, of course, but our final stop was in St. Pete. We were about a week late getting home. We were still working. We fueled up in St. Pete, and we got out the next morning and left to come across the Gulf of Mexico to St. Mark's, just south of Tallahassee, where we were living. The weather wasn't all that great, but it was supposed to get better. It didn't get better. It got worse. And so we left around 6:30 or 7 in the morning. By mid-afternoon, the waves were 6 to 8 feet. The wind was howling on the bow. It was awful even then. The bowsprit was broken off. We had hired a fellow to go with us who was much more experienced. He was a friend. He's an old shrimper, but he knew diesel engines, and he didn't know sailboats much. But anyway, the bowsprit was busted off. He and I had to crawl on our bellies to the front of the boat and strap this thing down. But it was too late to turn back. By midnight, the waves were 15 to 20 feet. Luckily, they were on our bow. They were coming from the direction that we were going, so we could keep our bow into it. Otherwise, we would have probably capsized and died that night. The winds were howling. We started doing 3-hour shifts. I'd go on 3 hours, and then Gail and Kenny, our friend, would go on 3 hours. And about 1 o'clock, I'd been down trying to get a little bit of rest. Gail comes down, and she's crying. And she said, "Steve, I don't think we're going to make it." She says, "It's getting worse." And it was getting, we were terrified. So I said, "Look, you get in this bed here." It was the aft cabin. It was calm. "You get in this bed, and you just pray. And I'll go up top, and it's going to get better." What can I say? It's going to get better. So I did. I went up top. Kenny came down and tried to get some rest, and luckily, thank God, a couple hours, and it started easing off. But that boat, when it was at the worst of it, it would come down the side of the wave and hit the bottom and shudder, and then it would climb up the other side of the wave, and about the time it got to the crest, it would shudder again, and then it would fall, and we did that for hours. We did it for hours. One little thing could have happened, and we'd have been dead. If that engine had failed, we'd have capsized and died, drowned. We were way offshore. So we can empathize with these disciples that, being on the water at night in a storm, or just being on the water at night way out in the open ocean, can be a very terrifying thing. No, but I know that vision comes to mind some when I think about that night. Our waves were much steeper, though. Those waves, whoa, but yeah, I know it. We were not there, but we had waves at least. Yeah, it felt like it. We were both glad, but by morning, by the time the sun came up, it calmed down. We got into St. Mark's, and we had a lot of repair work to do on the boat, but the old boat survived, and I'll tell you, we never let that happen to us again. I don't care. We had a thing. I was the captain of the boat. Gail was the admiral. Okay, I made all the decisions except when we're leaving port. And Gail said, if the weather's not 100% good, we're not leaving port. That was the admiral's authority, and we never let ourselves get caught in that again. We have a lot of weather stories, but nothing like that ever happened to us again. All right, moving on. Both of these incidents we're talking about today happened on the Sea of Galilee, the Lake of Galilee, whatever. I have a little picture. I like visual things. So I have a little picture of it here. You know, you're all familiar with the Sea of Galilee. It's up in the northern Israel. It's where, you know, Jesus and his disciples must have crossed that sea 100 times, you know, in Scripture. Capernaum is up in the northwestern side of it. That's where Peter lived. That's where basically his headquarters was. Nazareth isn't very far from it. And so anyway, that's where these incidents took place. It's surrounded on both sides by mountains, so it had a real reputation for sudden wind shifts. So storms could kick up on that relatively large body of water. I think it was about 13 miles long, 8 miles wide, but it could kick up pretty quickly. So our story starts. We're going to start with the incident calming the seas, and it's found in Matthew 8. And we're going to start with Matthew 8, 23 through 25. It should be here. Which says, And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but he was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, Save us, Lord, we are perishing. So here we find, you all know these stories, I know. We find Jesus. It's just a short time after he came down from the mountain after having delivered the Sermon on the Mount. He's gone back to Capernaum, which I said earlier is like where Peter had the house and Peter's mother-in-law lived, and where Jesus kind of made his headquarters during his ministry. But he's gone back there. In the meantime, he's done some healing. He's cast out some demons. He's healed the centurion's servant and so forth. But he realizes that a large crowd is gathering, and so he gets his disciples to get in the boat and let's go to the other side of the lake. You know, you hear that so much in Scripture. Let's go to the other side of the lake. The lake was so convenient for him, I guess. He used it so often to escape. He would get in a boat and go out in the lake and preach. He would go to the other side of the lake so he could escape the crowds. Of course, they would follow him. But so it said Jesus was asleep. What do you think about that? I mean, we have several professional fishermen here who, out on that lake, they've gotten into storms before. But they're terrified. They think they're going to perish. And yet Jesus, the carpenter, is asleep. Of course, Jesus was the Son of God, wasn't he? So, anyway, it's kind of an interesting thing. All right, let's move on a little bit. We got a lot of ground to cover here. Going to move up to Matthew 8, 26 through 27. Like I said, we all know this story. But so Jesus wakes and he says, and he said to them, Why are you afraid, O you of little faith? Then he rose and he rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, What sort of man is this, that even winds and seas obey him? So, the disciples had already seen Jesus perform a lot of miracles, healing and changing water to wine and casting out demons and, and all of these things. But what do you think it is about this miracle that seems at least to have had a pretty strong impact on them? Yeah, Jeff. Jeff says it's something they can't control. There is no way to control this. It's nature. It's nature. Anybody else have any ideas? Ken.
As you said, this is right after he completed his Sermon on the Mount, where he again accused them and many people of being of little faith, worried about the day-to-day problems of food and drink and clothing. And so he said this is kind of an extension of that. Don't worry about it.
He just keeps being reminded. Ken says this is just after an incident where he was rebuking people for not having faith, for being of little faith. So this is just sort of a continuation of that. This is right after, I didn't say this earlier, but this is right after last week, when he fed the 5,000 as well. So yeah, those things, it's different than driving out demons. It's controlling the the natural elements of the universe, which certainly God has the power to do. But again, the faith of these individuals was tested, and they seemed to falter some, didn't they? So, what sort of man is this? Is the question they ask here. Later on, we're going to see him respond in a different way. But when they said that, when they said, "What kind of man is this?" I mean, what does that say about their relationship with Jesus? They acted like they really didn't know him very well, didn't they? I mean, what kind of what kind of man is this that can cast out demons or that can heal lepers? What kind of man is that? So it did have a different impact on them, it seems, than some of the earlier miracles. The human condition, yeah. No, it's fairly early. It's relatively early. Yeah, true.
Find themselves being tested to believe who he is. Is he from God or is he God? So it's that thing where the more you're exposed to what's really going on, the more you can believe it. You have more faith in what's happening.
Yeah, Paul is saying this is probably pretty early on in the ministry, and we're not 100% sure who all is on this boat. We know many of them, but so it's a continual testing of their and challenge of their imagination to see what he's doing. Ken, yes.
Along that same line, those earlier miracles didn't directly involve, weren't things that were affecting them directly. This they're fearing for their lives. This is the first time they really got to think, this man is saving me in this life.
That's an excellent point. That's a point I hadn't thought of, but that's true. Ken is saying that earlier miracles, he was healing someone else. He was casting demons out of someone else. Their life was never in peril before. Right here, they're worried about themselves. So that's good. That's good. All right, let's move on. We're going to jump now. That's calming the storm. What kind of man is this that can calm the storm? But we're going to move now to the central miracle of this lesson, which is walking on the water. And that's found in Matthew 14. We're going to start in verses 22 through 26. And it's all on the board. I'll read it. Immediately, okay, that's immediately. Jesus had heard that John the Baptist had been executed. And that may be his urgency here to get off by himself. But immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat. This is after the feeding of the 5,000. I'm sorry, I was wrong before. This is after the feeding of the 5,000. And this immediately, it sounds like, clean up the scraps and let's go. It's immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. So I'm not sure how long this is after the calming of the storm, but it's some time. They've done a lot of things since then. They've crossed the lake a bunch. They've traveled through towns and villages in Galilee, healing and teaching, including Nazareth. They've spent some time in Capernaum. And like I said, it was also the time that he heard that John the Baptist had been executed by Herod, and also that he had fed the 5,000. So the immediately was sort of maybe a reaction to John the Baptist, and the need because of that, his cousin having been killed, and what that meant to him personally as far as his future, a real strong need to get off by himself. And it says he made the disciples get in the boat and leave, like they were reluctant to leave him there for whatever reason, but immediately. So again, it seems that the disciples find themselves in a predicament, and this sounds a little bit like what I was describing earlier, doesn't it? Beaten by the waves, the wind was against them, and so forth. So there's a combination of factors that seems here to have overwhelmed the poor disciples. So what things do you see in this situation that would have made this experience especially terrifying for them? This one says they were terrified and cried out in fear. Before they said they were fear of perishing, but this is a little more intense even. So what do you see here that's so terrifying? We just visualize this a little more. That's a big one, isn't it?
While, tacking back and forth because they got the winds contrary to where they want to go. They're having to tack back and forth, trying to get across this lake, and they're not making a lot of headway. But they got offshore quite a ways. Right. Maybe in the middle of the lake. Yeah. And then Jesus comes to them walking on the water, and they're in a spot where, they don't know sure what to do, but they do know, being men to sea, they're doing their best to get this boat to the far side of the lake. And Jesus comes strolling across the waters, and they, now they're in shock and awe.
It's a ghost. Yeah, I think so.
I think seeing a man walking on the water, it would be a terrifying thing. In the middle of the night, on a dark lake, the seas are raging, and here comes this dude walking on the water. Can you imagine walking on the water? Now, I can see walking on the water on a lake that's really calm. But can you imagine walking in the water in like 3-foot seas? It would be tough, wouldn't it? It's 3 to 6 o'clock in the morning, the fourth watch. Mark writes that Jesus was about to walk by them. In Mark's account, he said, and Jesus was about to walk by them. That would be terrifying too. We're looking, to Jesus, but that's kind of odd, but that's what Mark says. And Mark also, I think it's Mark says that they're about 3.5 miles from shore. They're about halfway across. And Mark also says they're straining at the oars. So these boats had sails, but they also had oars. So they were probably doing a little bit of both to keep themselves from getting into even more trouble. But it's a dark night. It's windy. It's rough. They had no lights. If they had a lantern or something, it was blown out by now probably. So that's I can attest that is a scary situation to be in. We could have used Jesus walking on the water a couple of times.
Get on the water, even in today's terms, but in that day there was no light coming from shore. And unless you built a really tall tower with a really strong flame in it that can be seen from a distance, which we know that was done at times to give people a landmark to come to. They were at the mercy of the sea until daylight, and they'd get some idea which way to go.
Yeah. I don't know much about
navigation. Paul's talking about how they navigated basically back in those days, and they didn't have, what we have today, obviously. They had compasses maybe, but they had to know where the other side was, and in a storm like that can be really confusing. I can tell you, if you're on the water, open water at night, on a cloudy night when there's no stars, you can hardly see your hand in front of your face. It's just that dark. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. I'm going to read Matthew 27 and 28. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So here's the story we all know so well, and we've seen it on flannel board presentations when we were kids and in Sunday school, and so since we know the next part of the story, and that is that Peter sinks, it says we may fail to appreciate the fact that of all the 12, Peter is the only one that dared step out of the boat. So why do you think? I know we've talked about that. We've all talked about this so many times. But why do you suppose Peter asked Jesus to give him this opportunity? Beth says he had great faith. Okay? All right. Yeah, it would take some faith, wouldn't it? It would take some.
Testing this image that they're seeing, that they think is Jesus.
Okay.
To see if it's really.
Is this really Jesus? Lord, is this
really you? He didn't say that, but wait, he said, "Lord, if it is you." So yeah, it sounds like it could have been a little bit of a test, doesn't it? If it is you, then still take a lot of faith to step out of that boat. Anything else? We all know Peter was very impulsive. He was the one that was always darting out here, cutting off people's ears, and making these statements that he sometimes couldn't live up to. So he was a very impetuous person, wasn't he? Going, yeah. He may have, yeah, exactly. He could have thought that he would be safer out of that boat with Jesus than in that boat, with the rest of these fellows. So yeah, he could, some of the ideas here that it gives is a test, more secure outside. He was always impulsive. He's more prone to action, in other words. It could have been prideful, let me do this, he can do this. Could have been a prideful thing. It could have been him wanting to show that he had greater faith than these other people. So that's all speculation. I think primarily it's just Peter, just being Peter, just being Peter. All right, so let's see. Let's move on and read 29 and through 31 and kind of wrap this story up. So, Jesus says, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why do you doubt?" Again, there we go again. There we go again. He's disappointed. I mean, what do you think Jesus thought when Peter said, "Lord, if it's you, call me to come out"? Ken? These people, this guy right here, yeah.
So, yeah, okay.
Ken says, Jesus says, all right, finally we're getting through to some of these people. Mike?
He was looking at Jesus. Now, when he arrived, he had to look around.
Yeah. All he could see was water.
Yeah.
Took his eyes off. We're going to talk about taking your eyes off in a minute. But yeah, I mean, like I was saying earlier, this was not a calm sea. This would have been a horribly difficult thing to do, to get out and walk on this water. Jesus was able to do it, obviously. So why did he begin to sink? That faith that he thought he had, or he began to look around at these seas and this water and said, "Lord, I am standing on nothing here," and I can see him sinking.
The water, and he's on top of this water,
Right.
walking in a rough sea, so he's going to be bobbing up and down,
Right.
walking on the surface of the water. Peter's doing the same thing, and he becomes aware. He starts watching what the seas are doing around him, what the wind's causing the seas to do, and he's bobbing on the water up and down when he reaches Jesus. And then he starts looking away from Jesus at the things around him, and he's losing faith that he's going to be able to stay on top of that water.
Yeah,
I think that's right. He gets distracted, and he takes his eyes off of Jesus. He gets distracted and loses his focus on the one thing that's keeping him on top of the water, and that's Jesus Christ. That's Jesus Christ. Gail?
Relates to us as we go through life, we keep our eyes on Jesus, but times the turmoil,
we get down in those troughs as well.
the other things.
Exactly. All right.
All right, let's see. Yeah, those are good answers, and yes, I think we can all understand how you might lose your focus in a situation like that. Again, Jesus is saying, "Oh, you of little faith, why do you doubt?" So, what do you think? Again, what was Jesus thinking here? What do you get a sense for? What kind of tone do you think Jesus was using when he said this to Peter? "Oh, you of little faith, why do you doubt?" Disappointment? Yeah, Candy. Yeah, I mean, he thought he had something going on there for a minute, but then Jesus begins to sink. So maybe not, Maybe not. Maybe we've got some more work to do here. You think God gets upset with us, annoyed, disappointed with us when we show signs of faltering in our faith? Of course he does. Of course he does. Betty. It's exactly like us today, isn't it? I mean, it's like me. I mean, I go through, my faith is pretty stable these days. I would say that, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been on some roller coaster rides in the past, and still a few bumpy roads today. So it is like us. We're human beings, Okay. So the question was, what do you think Jesus was thinking? It was, and what was his tone, and some of the ideas there. It was concern, reassurance, maybe. No, it didn't sound like reassurance to me. Ben.
Either, and we really don't know, because I can see him very compassionately saying, "Oh man, come on."
Come on, yeah.
But then I can also hear him saying, "Come on."
Come on.
What's going on?
Very good.
When I was a child, I understood the story completely. And then as an adult, when I look at it, there's so many things about it that I have to really think about. Number one, you're talking about that darkness. Well, how did they see Jesus if it was that dark?
Right.
And then you talk about the waves. Was he bobbing up and down, or was he just
easing through? Right, right.
And these are things that we don't
We don't
know that
know.
aren't really important,
True.
except for the fact that it happened. And it happened in a way that could not happen today, because out in the middle of that lake, in the middle of a storm, in the dark, about half the things we're reading about could not happen physically if it were not for God's will. Why would Jesus going to be passing them by?
Yeah, that's a puzzle to me. That's a puzzle to me,
Yeah. He wasn't looking for them. He was going to the other side of the lake, so he just bumbled across them. I don't know, And maybe he was going to show them the way. I mean, yeah, these are all great thoughts. And I know a lot. I've watched some of these classes recently, and I know a lot of these comments don't get through, but hey, we're sorry. There's some good comments being made here, and Ben is just talking about that. These things probably would not have happened today. There's too many things that are so different today than then. But and all that we're doing is speculating, trying to get some sort of a clearer visual of what actually happened that day. So, thank you. Those are good comments. One of the things here is, Ken, is Jesus his tone might have been, "Why haven't you got this yet?" So.
Then and now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is the lesson of this miracle, the message of the miracle. So what is the message of this miracle? Keep your eye on Jesus is certainly one of them, When we rely on our own resources, as long as we keep our eye on Jesus, we're good. But when we start faltering and we start saying, "Well, wait a minute, what can I do?" Then that's when we fail. We're overwhelmed. Our own limitations create fears within us, and so the central message here is to, like we've said, is to keep your eyes on Jesus. What does the example of Peter's teach us about our faith and our fears? We got to get out of the boat and face those fears and rely on God. If we just sit in the boat all the time. So what are our fears? I mean, we're not on a boat in the middle of a storm today, but what are our fears today?
I think people don't have many fears. They're going to do things their way.
Then he says, in today's world,
People don't have near that many fears. It's just no one's imposing their will on them. It's just I do what I want to do. Yeah.
And then what they can, do with what's going on in the world, or do they have faith in God that, and they live their life, with God as their goal, with Jesus as their goal, heaven is their goal, a Christian, their home is not this earth. This is the place that we are being tested in. The example of Peter, he's being tested in his faith. Do you really believe it's me? Are you really going to be safe with me, coming to me? And are we safe without Jesus in this world? No. We have to rely on God, to guide us in everything we do, and to keep us safe from the evil one.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, Paul says,
Are we safe without Jesus in this world? Are we safe? There are fears in this world today. David.
Went into fear. He immediately went back to Christ, and Christ saved him. So that's an example there also. That no matter how screwed up things are, you ask and you really mean it, you're going to be taken care of.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. David is saying that, this example of Peter, his faith was strong. He steps out, he falters, he begins to sink, but as soon as he called on Jesus, as soon as he came back, Jesus pulled him up and saved him. And that's a great example for us in this world today. Sure, we're going to fall, we're going to sink, we're going to falter, but we can always come back to Jesus, and Jesus has got open arms for us. Mike.
You cannot have great fear and great faith. So if you're going to have more fear, you're going to have less faith.
we can all visualize this, right? The seesaw with fear
on one end and faith on the other. I think that's a good analogy as well. And so the lesson then is what? Is faith. Our faith in God will help us overcome our fears. It's through our faith in God we can overcome our fears, whatever those fears might be. My fears, one of my fears is like evangelizing. I'm reluctant to do that. I'm reluctant to encounter people on the streets and say, "Hey, do you know Jesus?" I should overcome that. My faith should help me. I don't want to encounter people on the street and confront them and ask them if they know Jesus. But you know what I'm saying. That's a fear. Fear of rejection, fear of humiliation, fear of in our lives today, fear of financial loss, fear of health issues. I mean, we all know fear, and I know everyone in this room is like me. When you have those fears, you go to God, don't you? You go to God. I mean, so many of us have stories to tell about going to God with our fears. And where would you go if you didn't have God? So, all right. In Hebrews 12:2, we are commanded, let us fix our eyes on Jesus. So we've already talked about this. And we've already talked about that second question. What would you say are some fears that might cause us, like Peter, to lose our focus? And this third one, though, is good. What do you feel is the most common reason why people's faith wavers and they start to spiritually sink? The devil, Satan's influence in our lives, certainly. Yeah, Jeff.
Life, we're often more reactionary than thoughtful about what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, all the propaganda we get in our lives these days as to things that are completely counter to our faith and our beliefs. Ben, yes. Or counter messaging or whatever, we lose our focus, and our focus should be on God and on Jesus and on the strength that brings into our lives. Isn't that correct? So
get discouraged when he don't answer your prayers right off, you know.
Say that again. We get discouraged.
You get discouraged when he don't answer your prayers.
There you go. Okay. No, yeah, no, it's saying we get discouraged when God doesn't respond to us very quickly with, you know, we pray and nothing happens.
Maybe weeks later.
Yeah, we get discouraged. We want everything to happen on our timetable, don't we? Patience. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. I just learned those again in my life. Patience, love, joy, peace, patience. We need to exercise those things in our life.
Those things will help us keep our focus, won't they? So, all right. Let's go a little further here. Wrap this story up. This is where it wraps up. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." There's no, who is this guy this time, is there? Probably the same crowd. Many of the people in the boat here are the same people that were in that boat when he calmed the sea. And they said, "Who is this fellow?" And here they're saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Yeah, it's not over yet. It won't be over until, you know. So, but that's a good point, that they and maybe that, Ken's gone, but maybe that gave Jesus some consolation when they said that, you know. Maybe it did. But it says this was always puzzling to me, and those in the boat worshiped him. What does that mean to you? How did they worship him in that boat? Yeah, that was one way, by proclaiming that he is the Son of God. By maybe humbling themselves before him. It's kind of hard to visualize exactly what that means. Okay, 523, that's the song. What is that, Jeff? Our God is alive. So they broke out in a hymn. They did that quite often, so that could easily be the way they did that. So there's one more question here, and it relates to this scripture. We've got enough time to read it. Now when Jesus came, this is in Matthew 16, it's a different time altogether, but it's, now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do you say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." He said to them, but who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, "You are Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." I wish he had never said that last verse, and you all know why, but he did, and that's fine. But the question is, when Peter confesses the divine sonship of Jesus, the Lord says it has been revealed to him by the Father in heaven. So what part do you believe Peter's experience on the Sea of Galilee, we just talked about, had in that revelation? Anything? Sure. I can say sure to that question, right? Well, I think it was one of the questions that I skipped, I guess, was, 10 years later, after this episode, what do you think Peter remembered the most about that experience of meeting Jesus on the water that evening? A, that because of his faith he had once briefly walked on the water. You're saying B, that his doubt caused him to sink. That's what you think he remembered the most? Jeff thinks it was the failure. Or C, that Jesus had saved him from sinking. The touch. And touched him. Being saved. Yeah. Again, it's speculation, but it certainly had an impact on Peter. I know it had an impact on everyone else in that boat, and I suspect it had an impact on Jesus as well. All right, so wrapping it up. Take courage. It is I. When we falter in this life, when our faith seems to be waning, we need to go to Jesus. He's still there. And he is the Son, the one and only Son of the living God. Don't be afraid. Take courage in in Jesus. Jesus can save us from the storms of life. I would disagree with that a little bit. He'll help us get through them. He'll help us get through the storms of life. I'm not sure he's going to, it's just words, but I'm not sure if save would be the word I would use there. Finally, we must keep our eyes on Jesus, and that was the final bell, and this has been good. I've enjoyed it. Thank you for being here.